Why did Apple turn orange, and why should that terrify every CEO who's watching this spectacle unfold on screen?
Tim Cook is under a lot of pressure to start innovating. Why is Apple, an age-old company, suddenly starting to replicate Android's homework?
This actually reminds me of the Aesop's fable.
Every company that beats Microsoft eventually ends up becoming Microsoft. How did the rebel actually become the empire in the first place?
The two fat cats were fighting over this disappearing block of cheese. Well, Apple has recently unveiled a new orange logo. It's revealed iPhone 17 or 18 or 16 or 15, I forget the count. But the whole thing is that Apple is now in a situation wherein it is just completely stopped innovating, and now it's moved from its business model to from its features, from its functions to just colors. And this is what we're going to discuss. Why is Apple looking at some sort of change which is very superficial? Why should this terrify CEOs? And where do we go ahead from here?
Apple hasn't had any groundbreaking innovation in a very long time, and the users have started to notice, especially now since OpenAI came up with this physical device, and the conversation started around Apple is not getting into the AI space, etc. So there's a lot of backlash that is happening against Apple ever since Steve Jobs passed away. Tim Cook is under a lot of pressure to start innovating. Plus, because Android phones have evolved a lot, you have new Nokia phones, Xiaomi is capturing the market, right? And Samsung is basically competing with each and everything that Apple is doing in terms of features, in terms of user experience, in terms of their hardware. Apple, is under a lot of, you can say, spotlight, and to stay relevant with the newer generations, especially the Gen Z, I think turning orange might just be, being a little hippie, being a little peppy, or maybe they're going in the brand strategy direction that Jaguar went into and completely, crashed its own brand. So this might be a struggle that Apple is trying to unfold. Obviously, they're trying to do it in a very, very different way. So actually, in a very, very disastrous way, you can say. So I think the question here is, why is Apple, an age-old company, suddenly starting to replicate Android's homework?
Now, this, Janavi, reminds me of this age-old story between Coke and Pepsi. The book is called "And the Other Guy Blinked," and this actually talks about how Pepsi came up with this amazing fight against Coke in the 90s, and what they were doing was that they were doing blind tests, like taste tests, which proved that people loved the blind taste test of Pepsi rather than Coke, and therefore Coke got under a lot of pressure. Now, what Coke actually didn't realize, by the way, was that in a blind test, people will prefer the more sweet tasting drink. So it's a very, very wrong test. But Coke started feeling the pressure. Pepsi put up a beautiful campaign, and Coke basically changed tack, created new Coke, which was a complete disaster. They changed the formula. People started, completely piling onto Coke to change it up, and Pepsi kind of became equal in market share or just beat Coke or something like that. And that was the title of the "And the Other Guy Blinked." Now, I see a lot of parallels between something like this with what was happening between Apple and Android. Here was Android continuously challenging Apple, right? Continuously challenging Apple all the time. And Apple was holding its fort, saying that we have a very strong ecosystem. We've got these superb design features, etc., etc. But the gap was narrowing. And this is when Apple is changing its color to orange, is just an indication that perhaps it's Apple this time that is blinking.
So I think this is the time when we should take a step back and look at Apple's journey. How did the rebel actually become the empire in the first place? And why does that always seem to kill these companies? Like, for example, you've seen that every company that beats Microsoft eventually ends up becoming Microsoft. So do you think Apple is next?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, because it allows us to understand the entire life cycle that Apple went through. Remember, Apple used to say think different. So it was actually a rebel at one point in time. It was a niche product. It became a mass product after Steve Jobs understood and discovered the ecosystem that you can place around the product in his second coming. And then it started introducing, the entire world's computing power onto your smartphone in a beautifully slick designed way. Of course, you could see the entire growth of Apple moving from niche, moving from, let's say, the early adopters and innovators who had stuck with them for the longest period of time, then getting into majority, making sure that the majority stays with them because of, those sexy reveals that Steve Jobs used to do every single time, and talk about it in a very, wonderfully marketing way. What we saw over a period of time was, Apple had 50% market share, or if not more, but their innovation had completely stopped. Now, this is directly connected to Clayton Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma, because what happens is that when you're looking at the bigger the company gets, what tends to happen is that they want to play safe. They want to make sure that they keep earning their money from their cash cow. They are loath on, kind of putting change for the sake of it, breaking things just for breaking things. And that sort of mentality sets in deep. And this has also happened with Google, but that's another story. Right now, what we are talking of is Apple. This is where Apple actually has been stagnant as a company for the past 10 years. And now they're beginning to try and figure out how can they try to differentiate themselves in the very old and conventional brand building way.
At the same time, Apple's biggest competitor, Android, is actually doing the exact same thing, right? So the biggest players in the market are just playing on, is our voice chat better, or is our color better, or we have those rounded screens, edge screens, etc. So it has become every competition, everything that they're doing has become very, very superficial. So this is a great parallel between what happened with Coke and Pepsi, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, after their tastes were set in place, after people had started remembering or had created a smashability around the brands, they just started playing on campaigns, right?
Yeah.
They just started playing on colors. Somebody brought in Santa Claus, somebody brought in the cricket team or whatever. So eventually everything just became a big huge money spent on the advertising campaigns, and now Apple and Android, all the players in Android, they're playing the exact same game.
You know, Janavi, this actually reminds me of the Aesop's fable of the two cats who are fighting over a big piece of cheese, and there's this clever crow who decides that he's judge, jury, and kind of executioner. What he tends to do is that while they're fighting about this piece of block of cheese, he says, "Okay, let me divide it for you," and he kind of divides it for them and says, "Every time I divide, I'll eat a bit, and then you can still keep fighting." And he keeps dividing and eating and dividing and eating, and when the last piece comes, he eats it and flies off, right? And the two cats are not just hungry, but they're angry with each other, and they soon realize that the crow has completely outsmarted them. And I was just thinking about this Aesop's fable and wondering whether, you know, Coke and Pepsi actually did something like that, and now Apple and Android are doing something like that. So let's talk of what happened with Coke and Pepsi, right?
Yeah.
What happened with Coke and Pepsi was that they were fighting with each other about market share. They were talking to each other, responding to each other through products and advertising and the rest of it. And the world had changed. The world changed from consuming aerated drinks. There was a new generation. The millennials had come into place, and what they were saying is, "Hey, I want water. I want juices. I'm into health. I don't want things that remind me of how my parents' health got completely screwed up." And that is why Coke and Pepsi almost missed out. And now suddenly they were fighting this battle that nobody's interested in, right? And this is where I think Apple and Android actually come into play.
With Coke and Pepsi, eventually the companies that came into limelight was Dr. Pepper came, Paperboat came, right? These were completely non-soft drink kind of companies that completely captured the market share that Coke and Pepsi had been fighting like cats over. The same thing is happening in the smartphone segment, with Apple and Android companies being the cats, and the crow being in companies like OpenAI that's coming out with its virtual objects, right? Or with its virtual devices. People have an inherent trust more on OpenAI than on Gemini already, right? At the same time, we've seen companies like Meta investing around $13.7 billion in the AR, VR reality labs, right? So this is completely changing on what we are seeing the future as being. Perhaps smartphones will not even be a part of the future. Think about it. We've already started using a lot of features on the smart watches that we were using on smartphones, right? Your basic WhatsApp, your calling, all of that is happening through your smart watches. Your Sony has launched the smart glasses. So we might actually come to a point where the phones are not even in existence. So both of these big players that are right now competing with whether I have a titanium cover, or whether I have a platinum cover or aluminum cover, or whatever, that whether I can come with a pink or whatever rounded things, or whatever your Z phone is, right? These might not even exist in the next 4-5 years, with the way the rapid technology shift is happening.
I
And
get the sense.
imagine,
Sorry, yeah, go on.
yeah,
Sorry.
imagine that the new OpenAI device, if that comes into the picture, and eventually we'll start moving into that hologram kind of a scenario where you don't even need the devices anymore with you, right? The world is getting connected by a hologram, right? So the Apple and Google, who will remember them?
This is so interesting, Janavi, because it's like almost Apple and Android are the people on the Titanic arranging the deck chairs in the Titanic when there's a looming iceberg right up there, right? So that is precisely what is happening. I think what tends to happen, and which Apple and Android have probably missed out on, is that the early adopters and innovators are looking for shiny new objects, shiny new toys. They are going to co-create the story that will happen through OpenAI or through AI in general, or through, smart glasses and smart watches. And this is where a lack of innovation and a lack of a story around the innovation is actually going to, completely destroy them. I predict, which is a very bold prediction, that we are going to see something exactly like this happen between Apple and Android. We are going to look at potentially two really great companies which have had their day now sunsetting.
Yeah, right. So one of the reasons that Android has worked out or stood the test of time is because Android has stuck to its story very well, that it's for the developers. It's for the people who, want to build on their own devices. Now, Apple has always been completely closed off for the developers. You can't do much of tweaking on a Mac for example, right? So one very big niche, and especially the niche today that is gaining traction like anything because of so many open resources, so many agentic AI companies into the picture. So Apple has already alienated one big niche, and now it is on its way to losing out the remaining niche.
But let me talk about Android. Since
Yeah.
you said developers are the niche, developers themselves are being replaced by AI. So
Hmm.
then what exactly are we talking about for Android? Android is losing its niche. We are talking of two people playing by their existing playbooks, whether they
Yeah.
have a niche or whatever niche they are going for. I'm sure Apple has its own niche. People like me still are buying Apple because I don't know what for. And you have Android people who are like, nerdy developers who are probably going to just be replaced. And suddenly you don't have a niche over there.
Yeah.
These are the two cats, the two fat cats who are fighting over this disappearing block of cheese, which is being eaten up
Yeah.
by AI.
And in the meantime, the villages are going to the crow.
Good one. Okay, all right.
So back in time, if Pepsi could see Coke's weakness and the crow could see both the cat's blind spot, which character are you in this industry? What can you learn from these, industry blind spots?
I think when you say you mean all of us, and especially people who are ambitious, who are growth oriented, and who want to actually succeed in an industry which they are not sure of as to how it is going to pull ahead. And right now it's a time of chaos. We actually don't know how AI is going to play out, how the existing smartphone markets are going to play out. But what is absolutely clear is that all of us have blind spots, and the only way in which we can challenge our own blind spots is to not be part of the tribe. I think it is really, really critical for us to be outsiders to whichever company or whichever startup you belong to. So even if you have a startup, you have to make sure that you are in a position which is emotionally kind of distant, and so that you can see something more than everybody else is not seeing. And do not basically go for the sauce that the tribe is giving you.
I think in all of these years of running the constant rat race, we have somewhere forgotten that true innovations do not come from chasing the trends. The true innovations have never happened as an incremental process because we were chasing the next step from the X feature because the customer wants the Y feature, so let's come out with the Z feature. The true innovations always happened because we had the courage to think out of the box. Why did Apple become Apple? It was just a small company, like you said. It was just a rebel, right? It was Steve Jobs' vision. It was Wozniak's vision that created something out of nothing. The same with Facebook, the same with Google, right? So now is the time when we need to forget everything that is happening in this world and where the world might be changing because it is so volatile, right? You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. So just go with wild innovations for once. Maybe it is not a perfect product market fit. Maybe it is not something that the customer will be wanting. But right now, when you don't even know what the market wants, this is a perfect opportunity to just go crazy.
I think, Janavi, I'll add some more stuff to this. First, find out, do a temperature check. Is your company or is your startup talking more to competition than your own customers?
Hmm.
Do you know who your future customers are? Do you know who your existing customers are and where those trends that you mentioned are actually taking them? Are you focusing on, things that are stopping you from becoming a commodity? So like making something which is white and an orange thing is basically you're trying to differentiate on the deck of the Titanic. You're just arranging those chairs.
Yeah.
Now, I don't mean to trash the existing brand playbooks. Of course, change colors, fonts, etc. make a difference, but there has to be something intrinsically linked back to your product, intrinsically linked back to your origin story, which is not really happening over here. So I think those are the temperature check things that you need to do almost every day over here. What watching?
What is the answer to this?
I don't know what I'm doing. You cannot have two idiots looking like each other.
थिंक क्या करना है उसमें?